Box office disappointment has stopped untold sequels from being made, but it's not always about money. Sometimes a script about dinosaur-human hybrid monsters is just so dumb that the studio has no choice but to pull the plug. Is Craven actually the best hunter in the world? Well, he killed an entire cinematic universe, so that has to count for something.
Embrace who you really are.
In June 2023, Sony Columbia Pictures penciled in a June 27, 2025 date for another feature set in Sony's Spider-Man universe that would be a follow-up to the Venom movies, Morbius, Craven the Hunter, and Madame Web. Giving this new movie a release date timed to the 4th of July weekend suggested that Sony and Columbia had gigantic expectations for this title, especially given that movies like Morbius and the Venom films opened far outside of the summer movie season. Whatever the plan was, this extension of the universe Venom kicked off will never see the light of day. In the earliest weeks of 2025, Sony Columbia Pictures removed this title from their release schedule, essentially clearing all further Sony's Spider-Man universe films from its release slate. This development came just a few weeks after Craven the Hunter cratered at the box office with one of the smallest hauls ever for a live-action Marvel Comics adaptation. It looks like, for the time being, this franchise is getting buried. The mid-credits scene of Fast X made the impossible come true. Dwayne Johnson's Luke Hobbs finally returned to the main Fast and Furious movies, after sitting out F9, the Fast Saga, and most of Fast X in favor of the spin-off film Hobbs & Shaw. Hobbs was back in the picture thanks to Fast X baddie Dante Reyes swearing revenge on him for helping to kill his father.
Well, I ain't hard to find. You some.
Right after Fast X premiered, it was revealed that the next priority for the franchise was another standalone, all about Hobbs' rivalry with Reyes. Titled Hobbs & Reyes, it was supposed to go into production before shooting a proper Fast X sequel that would resolve that movie's cliffhanger ending. But Hobbs & Reyes has seen no further momentum since its announcement. In November 2024, writer Chris Morgan told The Hollywood Reporter that plans were sort of up in the air, and a direct Fast X sequel is already moving forward. It seems like Hobbs & Reyes may have simply fallen through the cracks. There have been no whispers of a director attached to the production, nor any rumors on when the film will start shooting. Meanwhile, both Johnson's and Jason Momoa's schedules keep filling up with new projects. Despite the grand mid-credits announcement, this spin-off sequel doesn't appear to have a good chance of materializing anytime soon, if ever. Director Matthew Vaughn has never had a problem with sequels for his films like Kick-Ass and Kingsman: The Secret Service, and his 2024 spy movie Argylle was planned from the start to encompass multiple movies, a trilogy to be specific. Before the film even debuted, Vaughn expressed hopes to make a second film that would be a prequel, focusing on the younger days of Agent Argylle. A mid-credit scene, meanwhile, indicates that this franchise could also have some kind of connection to the Kingsman saga. But things got a bit more complicated when the movie opened in February 2024 and cratered at the box office, bringing in just $96.2 million worldwide after Apple Original Films paid $200 million to purchase the production.
That is a twist.
There's absolutely no way to oversell what a colossal money loser this was for all involved, with critics and audiences alike finding Argylle an absolute chore to sit through. With no demand for a sequel, hopes for an Argylle 2 or any other franchise extensions have gone up in smoke. Given that Red One was such a costly endeavor for Amazon MGM Studios, it's clear that the plan for this Yuletide tentpole was for it to spawn countless follow-ups. When producer Hiram Garcia first publicly spoke about Red One, he noted that a key reason for the movie ending up at Amazon was that the company was known for fleshing out big, expansive worlds over multiple projects.
So, things that don't actually exist, you guys are responsible for them. Got it.
Red One was never conceived as a one-off. Garcia, Dwayne Johnson, and the rest of the film's creative team wanted it to flourish as a long-term franchise. It even received a theatrical release to elevate its awareness among general moviegoers. But don't expect Red 2 to soar into theaters in the near future. Red One was a level 4 box office naughty lister.
A level 4 naughty lister? Oh, is that funny to you?
Hey!
It brought in less than $100 million domestically and performed terribly overseas. While it did fine with streamers on Prime Video, the Christmas-themed action film didn't garner much of a fanbase or an enthusiastic audience response that would suggest there's any interest in a sequel. The very title of Transformers 1 suggests ambitions for a multi-movie saga. Given that the live-action Transformers title spans 7 motion pictures over 16 years, it's understandable why Paramount Pictures saw Transformers 1 as a guaranteed launchpad for a larger franchise. Before the film's release, key creative personnel associated with the movie excitedly talked about plans for characters like Chris Hemsworth's Optimus Prime to evolve over a planned trilogy of animated Transformers installments. The movie also features a post-credit scene showing Megatron rallying his Decepticon troops, a clear tease of a potential sequel's villains.
Decepticons! Rise up!
But Transformers 1 turned into a surprise box office bomb during its theatrical release. Among other factors, it had some robo-competition from fellow September 2024 family movie The Wild Robot, and considering the last couple Transformers movies haven't been great, people just weren't too excited about it in the first place. Even overseas, where the franchise's movies previously proved unstoppable, Transformers 1 flopped, despite the origin story garnering great reviews from critics and audiences alike. No amount of positive word of mouth could salvage a box office run this poor. This is Hollywood, so yeah, there will almost certainly be more Transformers movies of some kind, just not in the specific world of Transformers 1, by all appearances. Like many superhero movies, all superhero movies, there was hope that The Flash would kick off a sequel or two. Given how long Warner Brothers have been brewing this DC Extended Universe feature, there's no question that studio executives expected a lucrative return with equally lucrative follow-ups. As early as October 2022, it was reported a script for The Flash 2 had been penned, while The Flash director Andy Muschietti publicly discussed his ideas for exploring the Reverse Flash in the theoretical sequel. But The Flash sprinted straight into box office purgatory, grossing only $271 million worldwide on a $200 million plus budget. The Flash made less than half of what Man of Steel pulled in a decade earlier. Mediocre reviews were just another nail in the coffin.
What if I just emperor this guy?
That alone would have stopped any future Barry Allen adventures, but The Flash also debuted as James Gunn and Peter Safran were speeding towards a brand new DC universe. In this fresh era of DC adaptations, there will be no room for Ezra Miller's Flash in any capacity. Everyone in Hollywood must have done a double take when Universal Pictures announced it had picked up distribution rights to a trilogy of new Exorcist movies for $400 million. In fact, that decision must have had heads spinning. Before the first of those installments, The Exorcist Believer hit theaters in October 2023. Universally already penciled an April 18, 2025 date for a sequel, The Exorcist Deceiver. All systems seem to be in place to produce this trinity of new Exorcist sequels as quickly as director David Gordon Green had churned out a trio of fresh Halloween installments from 2018 to 2022. But then The Exorcist Believer came in gravely under expectations in its box office run. Apparently, neither critics nor audiences were super stoked about what Green delivered with this take on the franchise's mythos. Suddenly, the idea of chambering into 2 more Exorcist movies from the same creative team seemed like a flimsy idea, even if Universal Pictures had shelled out ungodly sums of money for these titles. Eventually, The Exorcist Deceiver was trashed, and plans were put into place to have writer and director Mike Flanagan reboot the whole franchise. His first film is slated to arrive in March 2026. All the lead-up marketing to MaXXXIne made it clear that this Ty West film would be the conclusion to the saga that started with X and Pearl.
You know what I always say?
Everyone loves an underdog.
But just a few weeks before MaXXXIne's debut, West began to backtrack. It turned out the filmmaker had a concept for another X movie that he was excited enough about that he wasn't opposed to directing it as his follow-up project to MaXXXIne. West's secretive attitude about this prospective MaXXXIne sequel means that no concrete details ever emerged, and now audiences will never know what it might have been about. By the end of summer 2024, West confirmed that the T sequel was not happening, and MaXXXIne's original position as the finale to All Things X came to pass after all. The film coming in slightly behind box office expectations possibly meant A24 was no longer as eager to bankroll further MaXXXIne Minx movies, but it's more likely that West just wanted to move on to other creative endeavors after spending the first half of the 2020s focusing solely on grisly period piece murders. 3 months before the 2024 remake of The Crow flapped into theaters, leading man Bill Skarsgård revealed that the movie underwent reshoots to create an ending that would be more open to keeping his character around for sequels.
This isn't the way it was supposed to end.
Those sequels will probably never happen, of course, since this Crow was pretty much dead from the moment its marketing campaign began. The Crow turned into one of 2024's biggest box office bombs and one of the lowest grossing live-action comic book movies ever, domestically. It achieved a borderline impressive hat-trick of failing financially and scoring absolutely toxic buzz from both critics and audiences.
You don't come back from that.
With all that in place, there's absolutely no way a sequel will ever materialize. Looks like those reshoots Skarsgård wasn't fond of were pointless after all. 2003 was a huge year for Will Ferrell. Early that year, he starred as Frank the Tank in Old School, and he finished it out by breathing holiday magic into the role of Buddy the Elf in the modern Christmas classic Elf.
Sorry!
It would be disastrous for anybody else to play Buddy, so without Ferrell, there would never be an Elf 2. But boy, did Hollywood try. In fact, Ferrell turned down a whopping $29 million to reprise his role. He told The Guardian, "I killed the idea of a sequel. I remember asking myself, could I withstand the criticism when it's bad and they say he did the sequel for the money? I decided I wouldn't be able to." Ferrell was still fielding questions about more Elf movies in 2013 when he starred in Anchorman 2. He reiterated that he wasn't interested, adding that at that point, that there was no way he was going to try to squeeze back into those tights. Twins is something of a high-concept comedy that revolves entirely around a sight gag. Arnold Schwarzenegger and Danny DeVito play long-lost twins. The 1988 hit from Ghostbusters director Ivan Reitman was a breezy romp in which two huge stars piled around and goofed off for basically the entire movie. Because Twins was such a hit, rumors abounded almost immediately after its release that a sequel was imminent. In 1989, a representative for Reitman said that the director was considering making a movie called, what else, Triplets. The candidate to play the third long-lost sibling was the hottest comedy star of the moment, Roseanne Barr. That movie never got made, of course, but in 2012 there was renewed talk of Triplets, with Eddie Murphy instead. Since then, however, it seems like any chance of a sequel has been nuked.
Here on the mainland, we just nuke it.
There are literally thousands of jokes in the two Airplane movies, but there was one hidden gem in 1982's Airplane 2, the sequel, that was totally legitimate. At the very end of the movie is a brief teaser for Airplane 3.
That's exactly what they'll be expecting us to do.
It might have seemed like the filmmakers were kidding, but it was really in the works, with most of the creative crew and cast on board for another flight. The major holdout was Ted Stryker himself, Robert Hayes, who just didn't think another sequel was the right thing to do. He later told Den of Geek that in the early 80s, actors who did sequels were looked down upon, and he was afraid if he did one more, he'd be typecast.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Hayes went on to star in the short-lived TV version of Starman instead, while Airplane writer-directors David Zucker, Jim Abrahams, and Jerry Zucker enjoyed further success with the Naked Gun movies. The possibility of the Goonies 2 has been bandied about for years. In 2005, Jeff Cohen, who played Chunk, said that Goonies producer Steven Spielberg had told him that he had an idea for a sequel, but that Warner Brothers wasn't interested. 2 years later, Sean Astin told MTV that Spielberg and director Richard Donner were considering doing a reboot, with a new batch of kid actors as a new generation of Goonies. Then in 2014, Donner said a sequel with the original cast was in the works. Obviously, someone took the gang's motto to heart.
Goonies never say die!
So many rumors, so little to show for it. As recently as 2016, Astin told a crowd at Phoenix Comic-Con that The Goonies 2 was back on, and that it would be about the original Goonies and their kids, and that they'd square off with the pirate's One-Eyed Willie. But literally just a few weeks later, Feldman delivered a dose of reality. Richard Donner is 87 years old, and it's like no one really wants to make it without him. And every day that passes that he doesn't do it, there is less and less chance that it is ever going to happen at all. Sadly, Donner passed away in July 2021, and any hope of a Goonies sequel very likely went with him. Even the marginally successful animated movies usually get sequels. That's why it's incredibly surprising that Who Framed Roger Rabbit never got a follow-up. It earned $156 million at the box office in 1988, which at the time made it the highest-grossing animated movie ever. Well, half-animated, to be fair. This is not to say that director Robert Zemeckis didn't have a lot of ideas for a second installment. While the first film was a send-up of 1940s film noir, among other things, the next movie was to be set amidst the world of 1950s film. films. He also wasn't the first or the last to try to bring Roger Rabbit back to the big screen. It seemed like everyone wanted it to happen. Producers at one point discussed a prequel to the original movie, in which Roger Rabbit fights the Nazis during World War II. In 1989, even J.J. Abrams worked on an outline for a sequel, but in the end, the property is controlled by Disney, whom Zemeckis says has no interest in Roger, and they certainly don't like Jessica at all.
I'm not bad. I'm just drawn that way.
George Clooney's first outing as a caped crusader in 1997's Batman and Robin wasn't supposed to be his last. In fact, Warner Brothers was gearing up to bring back Clooney, Chris O'Donnell, and Alicia Silverstone for a sequel titled Batman Triumphant, which would have been directed by Batman and Robin and Batman Forever filmmaker Joel Schumacher. But Batman and Robin was a critical joke, and audiences had flocked to watch Val Kilmer sit behind the Batmobile wheel just 2 years before, didn't show up to see what Uma Thurman's Poison Ivy and Arnold Schwarzenegger's Mr. Freeze would be adding to the villainous fold this go-round. Spoiler alert, it wasn't much.
I'm afraid that my condition has left me cold to your pleas of mercy.
Batman Triumphant was originally given the green light by the studio, while Batman and Robin was still mid-production because somehow whatever dailies the execs laid eyes on at the time impressed them enough to think a follow-up was in short order. Until the movie came out. Clooney, for one, stepped away from superheroism for good after the first film proved to be such a dud, and apologized to fans for being any part of it.
Didn't you apologize to the crowd at Comic-Con for Batman and Robin? I always apologize for Batman.
He admitted, "Let me just say that I'd actually thought I'd destroyed the franchise until somebody else brought it back years later and changed it." That person, of course, was Christopher Nolan, who launched his critically acclaimed Dark Knight trilogy with 2005's Batman Begins. The journey of Forrest Gump and his lifelong love, Jenny, earned almost $700 million worldwide on a $55 million budget. And wouldn't you know it, there was already a second book installment written by author Winston Groom, titled Gump and Company, locked, loaded, and ready to... So it made perfect sense that Paramount would want to give its unexpected cash cow another theatrical run. But after 9/11, screenwriter Eric Ross said that the appeal of Forrest Gump had been lost. He told /Film, "I turned in the script the night before 9/11, and we sat down. Tom Hanks and Bob Zemeckis and I looked at each other and said, we don't think this is relevant anymore. The world had changed. If Forrest Gump 2 had followed in the vein of the bonkers Gump and Company, Forrest would have inadvertently stumbled through more of America's most memorable moments of the 80s and 90s, including contributing to the new Coca-Cola formula, crashing the Exxon Valdez, and riding in the backseat of O.J. Simpson's white Bronco, all while being visited by Jenny's ghost. If Ferris Bueller was so stressed out by high school that he had to play hooky and make an entire existentialist adventure out of it, then middle age will not be kind to the guy. That's exactly what screenwriter Rick Rapier wanted to showcase in his script for Ferris Bueller 2, Another Day Off, which revisited Ferris on his 40th birthday, as he, a successful self-help guru who still hangs out with Cameron, decides he needs another epic day away. Rapier claimed that there was a lot of studio interest in the script he shopped around, so when Matthew Broderick appeared in a Honda CR-V commercial for the 2012 Super Bowl that riffed on Ferris Bueller, some people took it as a good sign that the long-awaited sequel was finally happening. But then, crickets.
Bueller? Bueller? Bueller?
According to Broderick, it wasn't a matter of his own disinterest in making another go of it that stopped the would-be sequel in its tracks. It was just that nobody could figure out how to make it happen.
It wasn't me, it was just nobody really agreed on what to do and when to do it.
Heathers is a cult favorite among dark comedy enthusiasts, but it was far from a commercial success. Even so, writer Dan Waters came up with an idea for a follow-up film that star Winona Ryder was all too happy to entertain. As the pair explained to Entertainment Weekly, Waters originally proposed following Ryder's Veronica into her later life, which is a page for a politician named What Else, Heather. Ryder explained, "It's Veronica. Years later, she's in Washington. She's somehow erased her past, and she's being blackmailed. There's like men in suits who know about the Westerberg murders. I remember the first lady was Meryl Streep. I'm like, guys, this is genius." Ryder believed in the story so much that she even approached Streep about joining the pick while they filmed The House of the Spirits together a few years later, and she agreed to do it. Even though the sequel hasn't happened yet, Ryder hasn't given up on the chance to take down some more Mean Girls. Fingers crossed this one might get another shot one day.
That's it, we're breaking up.
If not for the tragic passing of actor Robin Williams in 2014, Mrs. Doubtfire 2 might have actually happened.
I'm ready for my close-up, Mr. DeMille.
Director Chris Columbus, who helmed the 1993 original, told Entertainment Weekly that he and Williams always talked about the possibility of revisiting the Hillard family, but only if the right idea ever came along. It took decades, but eventually someone did pitch them an idea that had the pair ready to give a sequel a chance. But after Williams died, Columbus declared that any possibility of doing a sequel was off the table, as he has exactly zero interest in trying to start things back up with someone else in the role. Columbus kept the details of what would have been under wraps, but indicated that he'd eventually love to talk about it at some point. Of course, it's not technically up to Columbus. He told Business Insider in 2023, Fox Disney owns the rights. I don't think the Williams family owns it, so the studio can do whatever they want with it. Should they? God no. After E.T. phoned home in E.T. the Extraterrestrial, audiences were left to guess whether his pal Elliot would grow up to be a normal dude with a cool story to tell, or if he'd be completely off his rocker thanks to his otherworldly encounter. Well, Steven Spielberg and screenwriter Melissa Matheson's planned sequel, titled E.T. Nocturnal Fears, was going to answer that question and then some. Their pitch for the would-be sequel would have transformed all the relatively innocent family fun into a full-on sci-fi thriller, complete with childhood depression and devastating alien invasions that eliminated all memory of the nice alien that once hung out with the neighborhood kids. Spielberg later revealed that the project was abandoned because even he knew it would be a bastardization of the classic original and possibly even sully the favor held by the first. He said, "Sequels can be very dangerous because they can compromise your truth as an artist. I think a sequel to E.T. would do nothing but rob the original of its virginity. People only remember the latest episode, while the pilot tarnishes." If you've ever watched 2000's The Perfect Storm, which is based on a true story, you'll know that a sequel is pretty much impossible. Spoiler alert, they all die. And yet, Warner Brothers, blinded by box office dollar signs, decided to give the thumbs up to a direct-to-video sequel, which would have been called The Perfect Storm 2: Approaching Storm. Wiser heads ultimately prevailed and it never happened, but if it had, it would have been sort of an anthology sequel, centered on a group of Alaskan crabbers who, you guessed it, found themselves trapped by a big storm. The good news is that anyone who might have actually been intrigued by the sequel's concept can just watch Deadliest Catch on the Discovery Channel instead and count their saved ticket dollars.
I don't want to dive into a wave, you know?
True Lies may not be James Cameron's greatest cinematic accomplishment, but it did deliver the director a decent box office win with solid enough critical reception that after he completed work on the behemoth that was 1997's Titanic, he was expected to give Arnold Schwarzenegger another turn in True Lies 2. But after the events of September 11, 2001, Cameron decided not to revisit the would-be franchise.
You're fired.
Cameron told Ain't It Cool News in 2009 that, despite actor Tom Arnold's suggestion that True Lies 2 was months away from production, it wasn't happening out of respect for the real-life terror that made such a concept no longer a laughing matter. He said, "I'm always down for a good action comedy, but since September 11th, I've never felt comfortable generating laughs with nuke-toting Islamic fundamentalist terrorists." He added that even though there was serious threads running through the larger-than-life plot, True Lies really was a product of a more innocent time. By all appearances, the big-screen adaptation of Cassandra Clare's YA sensation series The Mortal Instruments seemed well-positioned to be the next big teen franchise. It had all the essential ingredients, including a massive book fanbase that clung to every moment of the production phase. So, naturally, 2013's The Mortal Instruments City of Bones was expected to be the start of a whole lot more. The script for The Mortal Instruments City of Ashes had already been drawn up, and the actors and crew already had a production schedule in place before the results of the first film's release came through, and put the brakes on everything. It wasn't the early critical blast that stopped the sequel. It was the fact that the much-hyped film made just half of its production budget back in domestic sales. Ultimately, despite some early signs that the second Mortal Instruments pick might be retooled and eventually made, the project was abandoned, and the series was instead relegated to the small screen by way of Freeform's Shadowhunters. What's in the box?
Oh, what's in the box?
In another timeline, it could have been the seeds of a sequel. David Fincher's grisly thriller 7 pretty well wrapped itself up with a bow by the time the credits rolled. But there was a catch. It was a critical and box office hit, which in entertainment industry terms meant that it was ripe for a sequel. New Line clearly viewed a 7 sequel as a slam dunk, but outside of studio circles, there was little interest in a follow-up. Fincher himself said, "I would be less interested in a sequel than I would in having cigarettes put out in my eyes." Still, New Line pursued the idea for several years, but rather than commission a brand brand new script, the company simply optioned an existing script and tried to rework it as a 7 sequel. But the script didn't mesh neatly with its predecessor. Its story about a psychic tracking a killer with similar mental powers would have required Morgan Freeman to suddenly develop paranormal abilities. In a way, you can actually watch this sequel. That movie, called Solace, was eventually released 15 years later as a feature with Anthony Hopkins and Colin Farrell that generated negative reviews and minor ticket sales. It's not an uncommon opinion among fans that the Jurassic franchise hit its high point with the first one and has steadily been losing its crucial DNA with every entry since then. It's like Malcolm said.
Before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You're going to sell it.
And even though Joe Johnston's Jurassic Park III was the lowest grossing entry in the original Jurassic Park trilogy, it still wasn't a total nightmare. Well, most of the time.
Alan! Alan! Wake up!
The real nightmare was meant to show up with the next one. Despite the dwindling return on 3, producer Steven Spielberg pressed ahead with a 4th film in the early 2000s, first bringing on writer William Monahan to pen a draft, after which the duties fell to writer-director John Sayles. He contributed 2 drafts of a very different, very weird sort of Jurassic Park movie. He jettisoned nearly all of the pre-existing characters, save for John Hammond, and instead focused on a mercenary sent to retrieve dinosaur DNA for a shadowy organization. The DNA is later used to create soldiers by splicing human, animal, and saurian genes. A plan so crazy that you know it was bound to go horribly wrong. Consensus seemed to be that Sayles' super dino idea was compelling but absurd, and Jurassic Park IV stalled for nearly a decade. In the end, the franchise went in a new direction with Jurassic World, and it's all been downhill from there. While prepping work on what would become Raiders of the Lost Ark, Steven Spielberg was encouraged by Columbia Pictures to deliver a sequel to his 1975 hit Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Instead of following up on what happened to Richard Dreyfuss in the first film, his proposed sequel, titled Night Skies, drew upon a real-life event from 1955, in which a house in Kentucky and its occupants claimed to be besieged by tiny visitors. Night Skies was beset by pre-production complications, including an astronomical price tag for its aliens. The biggest roadblock for the film, though, was Spielberg himself, who was developing more interest in a story of a young boy who encounters an alien visitor. He dropped to Night Skies and honed in on what would become E.T. Elements of the Night Skies script by John Sayles stuck around though. Some of the pieces made their way into E.T., of course, while the scarier parts informed Poltergeist, which was directed by Tobe Hooper, one of the original filmmakers considered for Night Skies. Meanwhile, the idea of tiny terrors eventually morphed into another Spielberg-produced film, Gremlins. John Carter was one of the most highly anticipated projects of 2012. Adapted from the novel series by Tarzan creator Edgar Rice Burroughs, the science fiction epic had been in development at Disney for years before Andrew Stanton came aboard the project as director. Stanton, an animation veteran, was expected to apply the same magic touch he brought to Finding Nemo and WALL-E for his live-action debut. The result was anything but magical. With middling critical reviews and exhaustive media coverage of its $250 million plus price tag, Carter only reaped $284 million in worldwide grosses and was forever branded as one of Disney's costliest flops. Naturally, the failure of John Carter also killed off Stanton's plans for not 1, but 2 sequels. Producers Jim Morris and Lindsay Collins told The Hollywood Reporter at the premiere in March 2012 that folks were already at work on the first follow-up, Gods of Mars. But by September of that year, Stanton reported that any sequel plans for John Carter were off the table. For fans of Guillermo del Toro's Hellboy films, the lack of a third feature probably still stings. The director and his star, Ron Perlman, remained hopeful about the idea of a follow-up to 2008's Hellboy II: The Golden Army for nearly a half a decade, voicing at various times between 2010 and 2015 that they wanted to move forward with the third film. Standing in the way of those dreams was the unfortunate but unavoidable reality that Hellboy 3 would cost an astronomical amount of money. And as Del Toro told the Daily Beast in 2015, there's nobody knocking down our door to give it to us.
Yeah, well, one day the world's gonna realize its mistake.
The coup de grace for Hellboy 3 came in 2017 when Del Toro announced via X, "Must report that 100% the sequel will not happen, and that is to be the final thing about it. Guess for now we'll have to live with Hellboy the Crooked Man and dream about what could have been." Technically, a Ghostbusters 3 exists in 2021's Ghostbusters Afterlife, and the surviving members of the original team are reunited on screen. But way before all of that, a different sequel featuring the original Ghostbusters team lingered in limbo for decades. Dan Aykroyd penned a third film, tentatively titled Ghostbusters III: Hellbent, shortly after Ghostbusters 2 in 1989. The story sent the Ghostbusters to an evil parallel version of Manhattan, overseen by Lucifer himself. Columbia Pictures, which had produced the first two Ghostbusters films, eventually put Hellbent into motion in 2004. But by 2009, the new film had failed to gain traction, largely because Bill Murray wasn't particularly interested in doing it. Aykroyd's script was recycled in part to serve as a storyline for Ghostbusters the video game in 2009, and multiple drafts came and went. Harold Ramis's death in 2014 appeared to put the Hellbent film into permanent stasis. Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films had all the ingredients in place to keep going forever, but a conflict was brewing, beginning with a disagreement about which villain Spider-Man 3 should feature. Producer Avi Arad insisted that the film include Venom, while Raimi wanted to introduce the Vulture. Well, we all know who won that fight. Despite the issue though, production began on Spider-Man 4 in 2007, but in the end, Raimi couldn't get behind any of the scripts, and he told Sony that he couldn't meet their May 6, 2011 release date. Raimi ultimately exited the project, which was formally scrapped by Sony in favor of a reboot of the series, and Tobey Maguire was officially out of the suit until his brief return in Spider-Man: No Way Home. 2013 zombie epic World War Z was a box office hit, netting more than $500 million in worldwide box office sales. That's pretty sweet, until you learn that extensive post-production reshoots sent the budget skyrocketing to more than $270 million, which then added to an estimated $160 million in marketing costs, reduced what looked like a blockbuster on paper to a modest hit.
Well, if it looked like that, I'd be skeptical as well.
Yet, Paramount pushed forward on plans for a World War Z sequel in 2013, with Brad Pitt returning. Director J.A. Bayona was tapped to helm it, but he dropped out in 2016. David Fincher then entered talks to direct the film beginning in 2018. That date came and went without any start for the film, and by 2019, the film was officially dead. Though no specific reason was given, The Hollywood Reporter cited a source that noted China's ban on films focusing on zombies or ghosts was the main reason World War Z 2 was never brought back from the dead. Superman Returns, Bryan Singer's Superman sequel from 2006, seemed like a bad idea from the start. It followed up the events of Superman 2, ignored Superman 3 and 4, and one of its major plot points revolved around Superman super-stalking his former girlfriend. Worst of all, the movie didn't really give Superman very much to do in terms of fighting bad guys, which, quite frankly, is one of the things Superman does best.
Is there anything I can do?
Yeah, you're a reporter. Help Richard track her down.
Still, a sequel was briefly put into development. According to star Brandon Routh, the story might have introduced Brainiac or Bizarro to the screen, while Singer says they were flirting with using Darkseid as the big bad. But then a combination of the 2007 to 2008 Writers Guild of America strike and Warner Brothers' disinterest all helped to pull the plug on the possibility of another Singer-helmed sequel. The 2012 Dredd feature, directed by Pete Travis and written by Alex Garland and starring Carl Urban, was a surprise hit with fans. Unfortunately, it seems that the bad reputation of Sylvester Stallone's 1995 adaptation was too strong for moviegoers to ignore, and Dredd failed to find an audience during its theatrical run. It's a cult hit though, so there's still an outside chance Dredd 2 could happen before we all get old and die. In early 2017, producer Adi Shankar vowed to make some sort of follow-up happen, even if it's animated. Then a separate project entered development in 2017 called Mega City 1, planned as a TV series set in the Judge Dredd universe. News about that one has occasionally trickled out in the years since, but so far, nothing has come of it.
Look like you've been through it.
Perps were uncooperative.
Director Tim Story's 2005 take on Fantastic Four was a critical flop, but earned $333 million worldwide, enough to justify a sequel. Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer was more satisfying to Marvel fans, as it featured not only Galactus' Herald, but also the World Devourer himself, sort of, and the Power Cosmic. But it still wasn't good enough. Silver Surfer had a higher budget than the first one, but earned less at the worldwide box office. It was a modest hit, but not enough to compel Fox to make a third film.
Which is really pathetic when you think about it.
Story had ideas for 2 more films and wanted to introduce characters like the Inhumans, the Skrulls, and Black Panther, who he hoped would be played by Djimon Hounsou. Rights to those characters were trickier than the Fantastic Four, and the sudden right turn of the superhero genre into darker, grittier territory ground the franchise to a screeching halt. Star Chris Evans later told MTV that no one from the cast ever got a call from Fox about coming back for more. Just goes to show you that signing a 3-picture deal doesn't mean as much as you might hope.
To quote a friend of mine, it's clobbering time.
2011's Green Lantern was a flop in probably a dozen ways. DC's corporate parent, Warner Brothers, bet big by spending more than $200 million on Hal Jordan's adventure. The writers loaded it with cliffhangers and world building with expectations of further movies.
Welcome to the big leagues, kid.
And then it hit theaters. Critics and audiences savaged the film, which only grossed $220 million, and plans for a sequel were scrapped. These days, Green Lantern the movie exists largely as a punchline for Ryan Reynolds, and it took years for the character to find his way back to the big screen in any substantial form. A different Lantern, Guy Gardner, finally showed up in James Gunn's Superman, while Hal is coming back in the series Lanterns. As for Ryan Reynolds' iteration of the aroused Crusader, any fans of that movie, if there are any, can consider him done for good. Roger Christian's 2000 science fiction epic Battlefield Earth had been a pet project of star John Travolta's for decades. Only half of the sprawling source material was covered by the film, which Travolta envisioned as the opening salvo in a 2-picture adaptation. Independent production company Franchise Pictures and German distributors Entertainment AG sunk millions into the movie, as did Travolta himself, who envisioned the picture as similar to Star Wars, but so much better.
Exterminate all man animals at will, and happy hunting!
Any comparisons between Star Wars and Battlefield Earth disappeared in the hail of withering reviews and negative box office that followed in the film's wake. It swept the Razzies and is widely regarded as one of the worst films ever made. Needless to say, they didn't make a sequel. Speaking of Razzies, in 2008, Mike Myers returned from a long stint away from the cameras to drop The Love Guru on unsuspecting filmgoers. It was the first project Myers had produced since wrapping up the Austin Powers franchise, and it was an unmitigated disaster. Despite the presence of Myers, Justin Timberlake, and Jessica Alba, the film was really nothing but an hour and a half of bathroom and bedroom jokes and netted just $40 million against a $62 million budget. But Hollywood being what it is, Myers was in talks to map out a couple of sequels to The Love Guru before production had even started on the first one. We're not sure of the exact reasons they never happened, but we're pretty sure the world is better off for it.
What was that?
I didn't hear anything.
Whitney Houston might have been the self-proclaimed Queen of the Night, but if the original plans for the sequel to her 1992 smash The Bodyguard hadn't been interrupted by the sudden and tragic death of Princess Diana of Wales, there would have been a real-life royal in the mix for its second round. Kevin Costner revealed that Princess Diana asked him to develop The Bodyguard 2 as a debut acting vehicle for her. He would return as Frank Farmer, while she would play a princess in need of some good muscle to protect her from the paparazzi and weirdos that tried to invade her space so frequently. Tragically, the day after Costner received the spec script for the pick, Diana was killed in a situation that seemed almost drawn from the original Bodyguard. She died in an accident after fleeing photographers who pursued her car through a tunnel in Paris in 1997. It may very well be the most tragic reason a sequel was never made.